Robin
Yes.
Churchill. I'm the Director of the Bureau of Chemical Safety and the Head of Delegation for Canada.
Steve Terrio, Senior Scientific Evaluator also in the Bureau of Chemical Safety, working under Robin with Health Canada. Former Head of Delegation to CCFA.
Hi, I'm Michelle Stockton. I'm the National Manager and Policy Programs Branch at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
Well, thank you very much for making yourself available for this update. And what we wanted to do is basically to use this opportunity and I guess, if I may use the word, even take advantage of the experience that you have as one of the delegations that has consistently attended and also contributed to the work of the Codex Committee on Food Additives for the purposes of providing more insights to other delegations from the various Codex communities where the Global Food Regulatory Science Society is offering capacity building, and in particular in the Arab region and in the Southwest Pacific region as well. So my first question to you is, you're attending this 53rd session of the Codex Committee on Food Additives, and essentially CCFA is now resuming its work in person after a period of interruption due to COVID. I would like to ask you, what are your expectations in terms of items of importance, agenda items of importance that CCFA53 will be discussing, items that might have a consequence on the further implementation of the work of CCFA. So and essentially for which delegations need to be paying attention more.
I mean, I think there's only one answer to that question. Like, there's, the paramount issue, I think, will be the discussion on wines this year, because it is, I don't know, it is could be considered almost a precedent-setting issue. I guess for a little bit of background, the provisions for wines have been held in the STEP process, held at Step 4, Step 7 for a number of years. These have generally been safe additives. They have JECFA ADIs of not specified. Procedurally, usually what would happen is such additives would go into the GSFA at levels of GMP, so it's subject to good manufacturing practices. Historically, this has been a little bit problematic for certain members who defer to the standards set by the OIB. So I might mess up the name, I apologize, the Code of Enological Practices by the OIB. In some additives, they do set numerical levels, and some additives they set GMP, so it's not consistently GMP in that code. So as a matter of compromise, earlier attempts to get the provisions forwarded were basically assigning a GMP level in the GSFA, but then having a footnote associated with that to further specify that some members would refer to the OIB code. Now, this was proposed a number of years ago, but the earlier attempts were extremely strong in the language. I mean, they were basically saying that some members require levels consistent with what is in the OIB. So the problem with this approach is that it is basically referring to an external organization that is outside the FAO, WHO FAO Food Standards Program, that is not an open and transparent body that everyone can influence the provisions, whereas in the Codex system, it's open to any Codex members. I mean, it's a Codex standard. You would want it to be managed by Codex and not an external body. So the provisions died, or they didn't die. Sorry, they were held in the STEP process indefinitely until it would be revived in the future, and it has been, and so we will be discussing it this year. And it kind of picked off where it left off. So I guess it was separated between the European Union as the major proponent for the reference to the OIV. I mean, you can imagine it was, it was pushed by Italy and France particularly, versus the Quads. Basically, it was Canada, U.S., Australia, New Zealand, all against it. Now, and it was interesting because Australia is an OIV member, and even then, they felt procedurally, it was just inappropriate to defer provisions to an external body.
And is this, Steve, mostly in relation to the way this external body develops standards in particular, or is it because in general it's an external body? Because Codex can refer to external bodies under certain conditions. And I'm thinking, of AOAC methods, for example, for CCMAS, or things like that.
Yes. I think it's the way in which it was done more than a referral being made. And in fact, so our initial counter attempts to soften the notes were along the lines of, to seek guidance on what is appropriate as GMP, you can refer to what is in the OIV standards. So it wasn't necessarily that we were against referencing in an expert body. It was that the language of the note was really deferential. It was really like, you got to go see the OIV to interpret GMP. So we kind of came back to that this year. So the new note, well, the part that's contentious of the note is some Codex members further specify the use to be consistent with the Code of Enological Practice of the International Organization of Vine and Wine, in brackets OIV. So it's still a pretty strong reference to the OIV, but I think the overall position by the opposing countries has shifted recently. I don't know, like, if Robin, you have if you want to explain the concerns regarding labeling and trading.
So what we've heard from some of the other countries is that there's a number of countries, particularly in Europe, who are bringing in labeling regulations later this year. And so very many countries are worried about their wines being out of compliance because they have additives that would be permitted in the GSFA if these provisions went through, but would not be right now. So I think there's certainly a lot of interest from our Canadian industry and from countries that don't have wine regulations and would follow the GSFA to really get this one through. But as a Canadian delegation, we're still deciding how strong we will be with our concern with that note.
So previously there were basically two proposals, C1, C2, in terms of the two types of notes. And now there is another note that is being proposed, like a third option, right?
It was with the two notes, one of the notes was from the European Union and Chile, and the other was from the US. But they felt that did not look like the working group having come to consensus. So they went back over the last 2 weeks and have come up with this option that they're putting forward together, which is in the addendum.
Okay.
So it's closer to the C1 note, other than they just changed the words, the maximum level, to the use.
Okay. So basically some Codex members further specify the use to be consistent with the Code of Enological Practice of the International Organization of Vine and Wine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But this is a discussion paper at this stage, right? So
well, it's not a discussion paper for new work. Recall that the provisions have been held. So really, the discussion paper is to come to consensus on a note which would allow the adoption of the provisions. So it's really just, that last leg, that last step.
Okay. So the discussion papers are there really to inform what to do with those standards that are currently held. And the concurrence on this discussion paper, or the way forward that is proposed by this discussion paper, will dictate how further, how basically these standards would be moving forward.
So I think the proposal is, if there can be consensus on the note, they will push for adoption of the wine provisions at step 5.8.
Okay. And I guess actually you informed me at the same time, almost of sort of the or you answered my second question, which was supposed to be, which really was related to, is there an item that would be contentious in the discussions of CCFA 53? But it seems that this one will be.
This one, maybe, it certainly was at CCFA 52, but we've seen an awful lot of movement by the countries that were against the note to being for the note. So not sure how contentious. In fact, it was going to be one.
This agenda item, I think, will be discussed during the latter part of the meeting, if I'm not mistaken, right? Towards the end of the meeting. Really at the end. Yes.
So I think the other one that we're expecting to be really contentious, it doesn't involve Canada, but the trisodium citrate in the milk. That one, the South American countries and the African countries do not agree on the technical justification versus the potential for adulteration. And so Canada has traditionally stayed silent on this because it's not an approved food additive for us, and we don't tend to have a lot of import or export of milk products, but we expect it'll be extremely contentious again.
So Ken, this is agenda item 9, but again, this is also a discussion paper, in relation to an item that is still held, I guess. Would you be willing to give a little bit of background? I think this one is held at step 7, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I even wrote down step 7 in our positions. So you are correct. I mean, very, very, very briefly, it's a very long discussion paper, and like Robin said, we haven't aren't really vested in it, so we've been pretty silent. The South American countries, particularly Brazil, have been interested in using trisodium citrate as a stabilizer in certain milks, particularly those from non-bovine sources, so goat milks, and those that are ultra heat treated. In both cases, the function is to stabilize, I guess, the calcium that's in the milk, because it tends to precipitate out when high calcium milks are processed with high heat treatment. So there hasn't really been any qualms about the technological justifications, and it's a very interesting matter in the sense that we have very routinely adopted provisions where technological justification has been proven, and where it's not globally used and used only in certain regions. That hasn't been a hindrance in the past, but I suppose simply because of concerns about these milk products, and it's not even milk, it's milk products, so not intended to be used in milk food categories proper, that it could lead to deceptive representation as milk, that it's been blocked. And it's a very unusual thing to us procedurally. So I mean, if we had to pick a side, I think we would be in support of the provisions being furthered. But again, we don't trade in these products, and so we haven't really voiced our opinions.
I guess traditionally, if I follow just simply the procedure in this particular case, traditionally, if a substance fulfilled the requirement of technological justification and safety, and in this case, if I recall or I look at the information, I think there is a no ADI status for this one. So essentially, there is no health concerns associated with this, and there is even a possibility to use it at GMP as an additive. But if essentially a substance fulfilled these requirements, there shouldn't be an impediment to moving the substance in to be admitted in the GSFA. I guess if there are considerations related to the use of the substance in conjunction with fraudulent practices, these need to be dealt with in another fashion and should not be, I guess, the justification to impede the use of an agent that has a good justification. And because that can apply to other practices where and so there is a precedent to that. But I believe that because of the heightened interest around food fraud and the concern about that. This is actually being looked at maybe in a different fashion. So it would be interesting to see how that is being.
It's been interesting because we haven't really received strong arguments of examples of food fraud or deceptive practices or issues in trade. So the counter arguments to forwarding provisions have been lacking, and I wonder if the mistake was earlier on when the discussions happened to allow these discussions without the suitable counter arguments or the suitable evidence of justification of yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But anyway, so that will be contentious for sure.
This will allow me maybe to move to now your interest as a Canadian delegation beyond those two items. What are the items of more strategic importance for you, or even actually if you can comment on your role as a leading Codex delegation participating in CCFA, I think since its inception when it used to be CCFAC. What do you anticipate really, your objectives, your role, what would you like to see yourselves accomplish as a delegation at the end of CCFA53?
We're really hoping to move forward that, to keep things procedurally correct. We're hoping to have a good discussion on alignment, particularly with respect to that procedural manual and whether it needs to be updated now and whether there's the potential for divergence, and how quickly we should be moving on alignment given how much work it is and how much the amount of resources, because it's so important. But for CCFA53 it was 350 pages, so I think that's a lot for any country that is leading it or feeding into it, and it's just a really heavy workload.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I think from my own personal perspective, it's a technical subcommittee, very heavily science focused, and I think our contribution has always been to assure really clear, really strong technical accuracies in the provisions that are adopted. I think we've been one of the main contributors to the alignment working group in our commons, and we've I feel like we, even though we're not authors of the alignment working group, we are, just by virtue of the fact that we provide comments on everything.
Which is great. You're contributing really to maintaining the integrity and the accuracy of the standards. So this is very important to have delegations contributing in this fashion.
Yeah, and I feel like we've also been not afraid of raising our hand and just really asking if the provisions being considered are accurate, or if more information is needed, just because sometimes things get through just on
quickly
incomplete information, and suppositions are made, and sometimes they need to be questioned. And we're okay doing that.
Yeah. Okay. I think the other one that we're looking forward to the discussion on is agenda item 8, and that's the mapping of the GSFA to the Food EX2. I think when we went into it, because we led that working group, we had thought we might be doing the mapping, but as we got into it, we realized that there was a number of decision points there before the mapping should be done. But I think the more we got into it, the more we realized this is a really important tool that we need to provide to JECFA as the CCFA, and to make it available to all the member countries and associations so that we're all doing exposure in the same sort of way.
And in fact, actually, that's an item that really was attracted our attention in the small expert community of the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, because again, as you pointed out, the way foods are classified, and particularly the reliance on Codex2 as one of the references being used for exposure assessment, making sure that there is really a good correspondence of the food categories in the way things are listed in the food additives provisions, and in essentially the categorization of food as they are considered in exposure assessment is really paramount. So I was very pleasantly surprised to see that item there, and I understand that this is not going to be the last discussion on this item. So this is going to be an ongoing type of consideration until that correspondence is carried out.
Well, I mean, we're certainly hoping that one of the decision points of the committee this year is that they will carry forward the work.
Okay.
We've certainly done the preliminary work on mapping, and yeah, the hope is that it'll carry forward, but that's one of the decision points, of course.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me and to us, I guess, in the Codex communities to which we will be reaching. And again, I'm going to wish you a great set of discussions as part of CCFA. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.